Welcome back. Last time I was doing a series on a Zorki 1, right? Well, yeah, it all went nice and dandy until it went really bad. Well, first of all, the shutter is alright, with one exception. There is a bit of a pullback of the curtains while winding. So let's say I wind it up to here, then I take my hand from the winding knob, it goes back. It goes back more than it should. Normally I think it's allowed to go back like 1 millimeter, something like that. In this case it's a lot more, and that is due to the little spring that acts like a clutch inside the inside here. So that spring is worn. I have to replace it. It's also actually no, it's not what gives this wobble, but anyway, that spring must be replaced. Otherwise the shutter is working fine. The slit is pretty okay. I still have to adjust it slightly. The shutter speeds are alright. The winding motion is nice. The shutter sound is pleasant. It's all good, but it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because of this. Now this video will be a bit of a mess because I have several things that I would like to explain and describe. I don't know how I will put them together. We'll see. It doesn't really matter. So this body shell. Well, first of all, let me put the body shell back, and let's assume that the camera is working and I want to load a film. I have a film here. It's a test film, T-Max P3200, expired a very long time ago. It's fogged, it's unusable, so I use it for testing the advance of the cameras. It should go here, and on this side there should be the little spool. I have one sitting around here somewhere, but it's irrelevant because this barely moves. And once you manage to get it in, you barely manage to get it out. The risk would be to actually pop open the lid of the cassette. And that happens because this curvature is incorrect. So it's like somebody squished it from the ends, and the curvature here and here got flattened. Normally it should look something like this. See, it's a little bit more pointy and it's a lot more refined. That's one issue. The other issue is the fact that there are a lot of deformations of the body shell. This is the most obvious one. It's like somebody hit it with a hammer here. Another area that's a lot more important is this area. And if I look from here, I actually can see the shell being warped. So this little project will be put on hold until I have the means to somehow straighten this. One way of doing it, from what I've read online, would be to have a block of wood that's 26.2 millimeters thick that you can put inside, and that will push on the body shell if it's compressed like this, which usually happens because the aluminum alloy used is very soft, and the actual act of gripping the camera can bend it. That would fix one issue. The other issue of the round ends is a bit more tricky to fix. I don't have a lathe, I don't have the actual means of producing wooden jigs to actually straighten the shell. And the third part of the issue, this area where the lens mount sits, that would be a bit easier to fix. I would need that 26.2 millimeters thick insert of wood that would counteract any force applied here. And I would also need a cylinder that's this big in diameter, probably, I don't know, a couple of centimeters thick, perfectly flat, that I could use to actually straighten this area. So I would place it on this rim and hammer it down slowly until, in theory, this part is straight. Okay, what happens if it's not straight? Well, I found out what happens if it's not straight. It's something that I never thought of checking and never had an issue with because I never checked it. It's like if you don't go to the doctors to do your, I don't know, blood test or something, you won't know you are sick unless you have some symptoms. Well, because I was in the process of fixing a couple of these Feds and Zorkis, so the early ones, I decided to buy this. Now this is a depth caliper, and it's pretty much mandatory if you want to calibrate the working distance, so the distance from the lens mount to the film plane. This is one of the cameras I've been working on. It's a fake Leica, and it's actually the camera that started this whole adventure. The depth caliper, the diagnosis of this issue with the body shell flexes and warps, and this is the latest that I've been working on. It's actually a project that I started a long time ago, somewhere in August, and it got put on hold because I didn't have screws. So all the screws keeping the top plate and the body shell were too narrow. I don't know why, but they just they fell inside the holes. And eventually I got hold of some screws and I'm trying to finish it. And the other problem, which was a major problem, was the fact that the winding knob was extremely harsh. It was like grinding coffee, and I eventually diagnosed the problem. It was the gear from the advanced knob. So that gear that has the little spring that acts like a clutch or an anti-rollback system. The vulcanite was a mess. I took it off and I skinned it in real leather. I did a decent job. It's not the best, it's not the worst. It's not perfectly flush here with the edge. I have a mark here, and another mark here, which are probably my fault, so done by my hand, because the leather was too thick. It was 1.2 millimeters thick. It should have been 0.8. This is all I had, and I had to actually thin it down without having access to any leather dedicated tools. I think it's called scything, the process of thinning the leather, and you use it. It's usually used on the edges, so when you have two pieces that overlap and you need to stitch them, obviously if you don't thin the pieces, there will be a ledge, a step. So you thin the edges and they blend, something like that, I think. So you could use a special tool like a blade to bevel the edges, or you could use a splitter, a leather splitter, which is some sort of a machine that actually splits a thicker leather in half. I obviously don't have one, so I used this and a lot of elbow grease, and like 1 hour later of scraping on the underside of the leather, I managed to take it down to a usable 0.8-ish, but it's ish because in some places it's perfectly flat or flush with the, let's say, top plate in this case. So here it's perfect, here it's not, here it's okay, here is not, and so on. But for a first attempt, it's okay. It's okay. I wouldn't mind having a camera for myself, but this is not for myself. All right. Trying to adjust the camera, because since it's a Fed, I don't know the year of production, it's a 6-digit serial number, so it's probably a later Fed one, but I do not trust the Soviets like at all. So I decided to actually check the working distance, since I have the tool, the correct tool for the job, and I decided to adjust for the discrepancies, and it had discrepancies using the original shims. All right. It should be, the working distance should be 28.8 millimeters plus minus 0.03. So you can have from 28.77 to 28.83 in order to have sharp focus on the film plane. In order to do the calibration, in the case of the Fed it's easy because you can lock the shutter open. In the case of early Zorkis it's not so easy because you don't have the option to lock the shutter, and you don't have threads for a cable release. Alright, so shutter locked on open, a piece of film inserted inside the film gate, so you can see the film there, because that would mimic the presence of the film when you actually use film. And the thickness of the film is quite hefty, 0.14 millimeters, so it's like 5 times the error allowed. If you don't use the film, you measure against the pressure plate. Now in theory it should be the same, but the pressure plate is pushed against the film rails by 2 little springs. The springs can become tired after all these years, and there can be a lot of room for error because the actual feeler of the pin of the caliper can actually push down on the pressure plate and move it from its position flush against the film rails, and it doesn't have to go far. It can go 0.07, which is an extremely small amount or a small distance, but it will throw your measurement away in such a way that you will maybe feel the need to compensate for that. So yeah, in the middle I made a circular mark so I can put this pointing at the mark. The mark is roughly in the center. I will try to, this is very difficult to show on camera. If I squeeze, you see the needle moving, and this is just me squeezing on the body shell. It is that soft, But if I put the camera like this and leave it alone, and if I read the needle, it says 28.79.795. So it's like 0.005 away from 28.8, not 0.05, not 0.05, but 0.005. So it's certainly a lot better than the Soviets did, like a lot better. All right, that's the center. If I move on this corner, it is 28.78, so I'm 0.002 away. If I move on this corner, it's 28.8 sharp. If I move on this corner, it's 28.79, and on this corner it's 28.77. So this is the corner that is furthest away from the correct value, but all within that 0.03 margin of error. In order to adjust for this working distance, you initially, when disassembling the camera, you will find under the lens mount a set of shims that look something like this, and they have different shapes. They can be like this. So this is a, let's say, how should I call it? I don't know how to call it, but it's a shim that actually moves the mount in its entirety from the film plane. In my case, I had 2 of these, and that was that. So only 2 of these. It is 0.17 thickness, and the chances that the film plane is perfectly parallel to the body shell are slim to none. So that's how much trust I have in the Soviets. All right, this piece is also from a camera, so it's an original shim. It's 0.28. Now this caliper has an error, a possible error of plus minus 0.03. So I am within the error of the correct working distance, which is, well, it's okay, I suppose. I didn't find anything more precise than this at a decent price. All right, I also have these are homemade, so I cut some circular strips of material using something like this. It's a kind of craft knife used to cut circles. It has a pin here that sticks to, points through the material, and then you turn it around and it has a blade here, and the blade cuts the material. All right, the material used for these is something like this. It's a slightly waxy cardboard style of material, and it's actually from a box of Chinese food, and it's fabulous. Now this I use for gross alterations of the working distance because it is very thick, 0.38. All right, what else did I use in this case? I used this, which is Teflon tape used in cooking. So it's what you put inside the oven on a tray to, I don't know, cook food, pretty much. and this is 0.08, so it's a lot thinner, and I use this for a lot for adjustments that are a lot more minute. And even so, so let's go again. If I squeeze harder, it's 0.07. 0.08 is almost 3 times the maximum allowed error, which is 0.03. Now, if you really want to go all the way, you would need to go to below 0.03. Now, for that, I used this. This is also used in cooking. It's paper, waxed paper. I don't know if it's rice paper or whatever it is. It's baking paper. And this one is 0.03 to 0.04, so half the thickness of the other one. I'm sure I could find something even thinner than this. Maybe the tracing paper used to copy shapes and stuff. That might be thinner, but I don't know. If you get it to this kind of precision, you should get the statue in the center of Moscow. Anyhow, what happens if the seat of the lens mount is not straight, like in this case, and like in most cases actually, from what I've seen? I might be wrong. Please drop a comment if you think I'm wrong, or if you have adjusted lots of these lens mounts and you have more experience, so you can contradict me. But if this area is not flat, the lens mount will not sit flat. Or if the sitting area is flat but it's canted, so it's not parallel to the film plane, then you will need to add more shims on one side. And that means that so in either of the two scenarios, once you put the lens mount this one, I think, is even thicker. I'm sorry, I have ADHD or something. 0.41. So when you put the lens mount back and you screw it in, it can warp or flex. And when that happens, of course, you can't see it, and you get the lens mount back, and then you use your caliper to measure the working distance, and it's 28.8, perfectly fine all over the film plane or the film gate, and you are super happy with your result. And then you decide that you are going to mount a lens. This lens came with this camera, so you are going to mount a lens and take it for a spin, and you will have super sharp photos from your Soviet lenses. And then you want to focus your lens, and it moves like shit. It moves worse than an unserviced lens. This is an unserviced lens, but it does not move like that. It moves actually relatively freely. And this is what I've been doing for the last couple of days, trying to figure it out, trying to figure out what to do, how to do it in order to fix the problem. And of course, the first step is to diagnose the problem. So my first attempt was to loosen all the screws until the lens mount was wobbly, remount the lens just to find out that it was now focusing smoothly. So obviously the problem was within the lens mount, and the problem is not, as far as I can tell, it's not obvious for this kind of lens. So this is an Industar 50, is the non-collapsible variant of the old Industar, but I might be wrong. But I'm not wrong. This one focuses smoothly because the helicoid, I think, is a lot further away from the lens mount than in the case of a collapsible. In the case of a collapsible, it's right there on the threads of the lens mount, and that means if the lens mount is twisted, it will induce a very slight twist in the lens, and the friction between the two surfaces of the helicoids will be so much increased that the lens will focus terribly, if at all. Same, but to a lesser extent, applies to a Jupiter 8, the early design. It focuses rough, it's not nice. The later designs, I think, work a lot better. So the rhomboidal shaped ones, like the Jupiter, the black Jupiter 8s, because it has that lens has a bit of a different design, so I think that helps. If I put it on this one, which also has that issue but not so visible, it's a bit better, but in no way, shape or form a smooth motion. And now for the very interesting part that I discovered like an hour ago and I still don't understand. This is a FED, right? Let's see. This is an Industar. This is an Industar. This is an Industar. And this is a FED. So pretty much identical design, right? And this is a Lights Elmar, so it's totally different, right? And it's a fake, I don't know what, probably FED. Let's see which of these lenses work in which way on this body. I'll start with this. So this is an Industar unserviced, so it's as it was. It's terrible. I mean, I can barely move the focusing ring. It's not like that with the lens of the camera. Another Industar. This one is serviced and it's terrible. Otherwise, moving super smoothly. This is the third Industar unserviced. Horrible. This is, we don't know what, could be anything. A lot better. It's still rough, but this lens was not serviced and it has a bit of roughness when focusing it off the camera. Not roughness in the sense of unevenness, but it is better. And this, it's a serviced FED. Super smooth. that makes me believe that it is more than the warp of the lens mount. It is something in the design of these motherfuckers. I don't know what. I don't know what. But for sure, the fed lens and the Industar lens, these are both serviced, were not made in the same place. They are not the same lens. This is the Industar 22 and this is, I think, a version of Industar 10, I think, that has fed written on it. Optically it's pretty much the same, but the construction is a bit different. This one is longer than this one, so that shouldn't matter, but as an idea. And the idea is that this one works fine on this one does not. Also, this one works ish, okay, ish. I wouldn't use it, but it's somewhat usable on this. This one works fine. This one, horrible. But there is a big difference in design between these two, or these two and the Jupiter. And this one focuses decently in hand, but pretty rough on most of the cameras I tried it on. I'm still not really sure why. Anyhow, this is what I wanted to say and show. The fact that nothing is as easy as it might sound or it might look, and there are pitfalls at every step. These are Soviet cameras, they are not Japanese cameras, they are not German cameras. If I put any of these lenses, especially these two or the Jupiter, on my Nikon or on my Leotax, it will be like night and day. Unfortunately, this is the reality. They are nice cameras, they work. This one in particular, I managed to get the shutter working very nicely. The advance is still a bit rough because I stole that gear from a donor camera, and it's still not meshing perfectly, but it's a lot better. And you'll have to believe me because I can't show it without unscrewing everything again, but the gap between the curtains is perfect. I mean, it's like the best I did so far. I'm really happy with it. Also, the stitching is pretty decent. I've done better more recently, like this one. I mean, yeah, it's a bit better. It's a lot tighter. And also on this one, you can probably see nothing. So this is a finer stitching. This is also something similar, and this is a much wider spaced stitching, but it's an older stitching. But I'm really happy with the way they turned out. So yeah, be careful if you go down this route of trying to adjust every speck of the camera to where it should be. There might be pitfalls and you might end up in a very deep rabbit hole. Thank you, goodbye.